Welcome to the Manage to Win podcast. We got an interesting guest today, Hywel Berry. He is a training expert guru, and we teach in Manage to Win a 3T process when you're training people, developing people. So you teach to transfer knowledge, you test to make certain they can apply what they learned, and then you train and mentor until they master something. But Howell's got something that he adds to our approach, and that is, what if you insert some cynicism? So he's got a framework to address doubts head on, foster critical thinking, and inspire meaningful change. Sound challenging? Sound possibly provocative? Meaningful? Something that can help you? I think so. Let's dive in. Howell, thank you very much for joining me on the show. You got a lot of energy. I saw some of your stuff. I'm looking forward to the conversation. But one thing really jumped out at me because you talked about leading through cynicism. And normally you're thinking about, these, big pumping, let's go get them team. And you're bringing up an interesting alternative method possibly. And I don't know where you want to dive in there, whether you got a good story to kick it off, but it's over to you.
Lovely. Well, yeah, I will give you my story, which is where the cynicism comes from. I am English, as you might be able to tell from my accent, David. I've lived here for 16 years. But I was a leader in the UK for the Financial Times newspaper. It was them that brought me over here. I was here for a year before the world crashed, unfortunately, and I was let go, and all the negativity and terrible feelings you have that comes with that. And so I had to look for a new career, ended up in the corporate training world. And what I realized very quickly was, you've got a split of people in the room. You've got those people who love training and want to be there. So there's no great skill in winning over those people. They're dying to do training. They're immediately positive, immediately friendly, and want to chat to you. What I realized was the skill of training was winning over cynics, was winning over the people who did not want to be in training, thought negatively about it, had horrible past experiences. Or let's face it, David, a lot of people feel that training is a punishment. I've done something wrong, so I've got to be forced to go along and learn. And where you really notice this, interestingly, in the training world is if you had like a few sessions in a day, all the people who don't want to be there will turn up to the final session. I think it's like a little stand they take in their mind, like the last session I can go to, I'll force myself to go along. And so that was always the most difficult session. And I certainly would not claim I dealt with it perfectly, but I think I dealt with it quite well. And one of the reasons was I was the cynic, David. I was the person who didn't want to be there as a leader. I didn't like training. I was cocky in my 20s. I'd been promoted very early. I thought I knew everything. So I realized that not just for trainers, but for leaders, we don't deal with cynics and negativity very well, frankly. We look at it immediately as a problem.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I probably will from time to time. But I'd like to stay there for a moment. So when you were younger, you're saying you were the cynic, not today. Okay. But, it's funny. When I was young, I knew everything. So,
Yeah.
And then the older I get, the more I become aware of how little I knew or know, and I'm still learning. But what was the turning point? Did you ever have a turning point as a cynic in the class who then realized, oh, I need to learn this stuff? Or did you wait, or did it hit you later when you actually had to do the training and lead it?
No. Look, I did. I'm not saying I was always awful in the classroom, but you had to win me over. I didn't turn up to a training expecting to enjoy it or dying to get this information. And one of the amazing things is, and this is one of the terrible pieces of leadership, David, as we know, people don't get training right away. You have done it for a while. I was almost 18 months in before I got any real training. So by that point, it was like, well, I've done it now. What could you possibly teach me? As you say, of course, naivety of youth. But if you won me over, I was a wonderful student to have in the room. Then I would be incredibly engaged and incredibly positive and keen to join in with everything and trying to get other people excited as well. But that was a journey that you had to win. You didn't just get that from me.
So do you have a story of when you were that age and you were the cynic?
Yeah.
And maybe you talk about the trainer or whatever, but what did that person do that then the light bulb went on for you?
Absolutely. I do have a story that honestly I've been telling now for 15 years as a trainer, but I even remember what the guy's called. He was called Kurt. I unfortunately can't remember his second name, but I must have been mid to late 20s. So I had been managing teams for a few years. We turned up to the training. He was fine. I got no problem with him, but I didn't really want to be there. But he was perfectly chirpy and nice. But as the day went on, I did what I normally do, which is sit there looking a bit grumpy, a bit cynical, joining in if I'm forced to, but that's about it. And then at some point we had to go, and I was in sales, so we had to practice a presentation. Then we would come back later on and deliver this presentation. So everybody went off to various parts of the room to practice. They were writing things out and making notes. And I had been an actor when I was a kid. I was very good at improvisation and just performance. So I didn't really need to practice. I just sort of sat there thinking about it. He clearly in his mind thought that I was just doing nothing at all, which it wasn't nothing. I'm certainly not going to claim I was doing a lot, but I was preparing in my head. But then he came over to me and very politely but said, Hywel, I'd like you to go first, if that's okay. And I was like, yeah, no problem. I was like, I know why he's doing this. He thinks he's going to catch me out, like I'm going to fall on my face and look like an idiot. So we finished the break and the moment prep. I got up, I did my presentation. I'd incorporated all the ideas that he had talked about. We finished, and then he said to me, and this was the line that has stuck with me, David. He said, Hywel, you're a nightmare, you know, because you look like you're doing nothing, but actually you're taking all this in. And it was that moment of honesty from him, which is, I thought I was going to catch you out. You've beaten me, but he was honest enough to admit that he was wrong and that I wasn't just being lazy and idiotic, but it was also big enough for both of us to sort of admit, okay, we get each other now. Like, I can't get away with doing nothing, but you're going to be really honest if you're not 100% right as well. And up until then, a lot of trainers who had been a lot older than me, let's be honest, you know, people enter this career at a certain age in their life, they had spoken to me as if I should just sit down and listen to them because they were older and experienced. They should know what they were doing. So it was this moment of just equality in us. After that moment, he had me completely. So there was no more sitting looking bored and annoyed. I was the one who was bringing up the energy in the room. I was the one getting everybody excited. I talked about him for months after this and got him lots more work at the newspaper because of it. And I still remember him, what must be now 25 years later, because of this moment. So then when I went into it on the other side, I wanted to emulate that feeling of empathy, understanding, and cynicism for you don't all want to be here. This isn't the funnest thing you've all done this week. You've probably got a million other things to do. How do I get you to feel that I understand that so you can let it go and actually learn something that I believe will be useful to you if you can hear it?
So what do you do about the cynics, or the, maybe not even necessarily, excuse me, that I would call them a cynic, but they're just not committed. They're there, the body's there, but they just want to check the box. But they're not as smart or working under the surface as you were. I mean, they're truly just, they're going to do the minimal. How do you get them fully engaged?
Well, there's two sides to this. First of all, David, of course, is the idea that how we perceive people is not really what's going on at all. So exactly like my story, Kurt perceived me as doing nothing at all, but I was taking all this in and making it make sense in my mind. But like a lot of the training I do lots with salespeople and people who present, so they're relatively gregarious. But a lot of the training I do and a lot of the people that leaders work with, they're not naturally chatty in a room. So just because they're not shouting ideas out doesn't mean they're bored. It doesn't mean they don't care. So I had a gentleman once in a session who sat, interestingly, a little bit like you are right now, David, arms crossed, you know, which we.
And that's only because it's a little bit cool language in here, by the way, just to clarify. It's not that I'm.
That's the thing. But, you know, we've been taught closed body, looking down.
Yeah.
These are all things that says bored, not paying attention. So I've got 20 other people to worry about. If somebody's not interested, I'm not going to spend my entire session trying to win you over. I'll give it a go. But eventually I thought, he's not interested, no problem. We got to the end of the session. He came running over to me, shaking my hand. Hywel, that was absolutely fantastic. And I said, oh, okay. To be honest with you, you didn't look like you're having fun. And he's like, yeah, that's just how I sit. Like he knew it. He'd been told it by people. You look bored, you look annoyed. But that's how he sits. He's not going to change that after a lifetime of doing it. So number one, we perceive what we may take as indifference or not caring or not taking in information. Not true at all. But there's the other side of it's training, or I'll put it into leadership in a second, but in pure training, I don't feel it's necessary that you're all throwing yourself into this with the highest energy possible. That would be a weird training room apart from anything else. Like there has to be a certain variance of people in the room. And again, if you had any meeting with a team of 10 and everyone was your talkative champion, it would just be a nightmare. Like you've got to have some balance of personalities. So the quieter person, fine. So in a training environment, what I do is then go and find them at a smaller group time. And honestly, more often than not, David, they will then want to talk to me. They're just not the sort of people who talk in a large group. Exactly like in any meeting, everybody is not the person who has an idea immediately. Some people will have a great idea tomorrow. Like I'm great in a meeting room, David. I've always got something to say, and it's based on nothing other than my opinion. But other people honestly want to research something before they say it. But we all therefore project a different energy. The really difficult cynic is the one who looks like they're joining in and hates it, but either sitting quietly or not joining in at all, I can deal with better.
Well, talk to me a little bit more about the training, because I think that so many companies and leaders don't really do an effective job training. They throw people at videos, or they put somebody at the front of the room who talks the whole time, or death by PowerPoint, just to use that product, but any similar product. So when someone's thinking of doing an effective training, how do you structure it where, what is the presentation flow, and what is the interaction? What makes a great training?
So again, I wouldn't say there is a one size fits all for everybody. Certain leaders, if you're training your own team, I would say that everybody should play to their own strengths. If you are an expert who simply has something interesting to tell the team, then great, do that. Don't feel you have to emulate anybody else. But I do think that in a modern world now, with the pace of media coming at us, with the manner in which we absorb information online, the manner in which meetings are now run, I think anything where people aren't interacting, or at least given the option to interact, our attention span simply doesn't warrant that anymore. We will shut off pretty quickly. So I'd actually been running virtual trainings for years before COVID came along, but I'm sure you know, of course, when COVID hit, all training from anyone providing in that world had to move online. So I'd already sort of built up a practice at this, but many companies and people we partnered with, this was a very new thing. But actually the virtual environment or hybrid or sitting in a room, there are just many, many ways to get people to interact. And so a core idea that we're trying to teach doesn't take long. Like really, how long do we have to spend explaining an idea before intelligent people will basically understand what we're saying? The next step, as soon as you can, is to get them doing something with it. Talking to you, the trainer or leader, about it, talking to each other, doing an exercise, some way to sort of use this. The real depth of it is going to come afterwards. So the depth will come now that you've given me the idea. I've had a chance to try it out. That's when people will ask questions. But I could sit explaining at you for hours. So a good example is driving, David. You could sit in a room watching videos about how to drive for months. You'd never be able to do it. But actually, how much do you need? to get behind the wheel of a car. Basically, the basic setup, this is what the pedals do. I'm here, don't worry. Let's go and have a go at it. And that's when our brain will start making sense of this. So why do we still think, and let's face it, our children are still put into this world of somebody just standing at a board talking at them for an hour, and then we're shocked that their brains haven't absorbed this and made it real in their mind. So the more interaction you can get will create questions from cynics and everybody else, but actually really good cynical questions after they've had a go is where we're going to find the real application.
Yeah, I noticed that you do a course called Making Virtual Work, and that sounded like that was great. So when you're doing a virtual training and you're taking this approach where you're getting across a major concept and then having them do something with it, what's the typical group size in a virtual?
Typical for a virtual online trainings is 20 people there and thereabouts. And then obviously you can do virtual keynotes in a modern world up to thousands and thousands, but a truly interactive training, it's good around 20.
Yeah, so you've got 20 people. And so when you have them apply something, are you typically doing that where they're doing it on their own, or they're doing it as a group of 20, or are you using the technology to separate them into groups so they can work on it as a group, and then each group can report back?
Yeah, definitely using the technology. And again, like there's some amazing things you can do in a virtual world that you can't do in real life. So most systems, Zoom that we're on right now, but Teams, WebEx, all of these systems, the chat box is actually an amazing tool that in real life you cannot recreate. So if I have 20 people in a live room, if I've got a question, what's your biggest challenge right now? For me to go round all 20 people and get them to say something, even just those ones who want to say something, that could take 10, 20, or 30 minutes. But in a virtual world, to say, everybody throw into the chat box, what's your biggest challenge right now? 30 seconds to think about it, 30 seconds to write it into the chat box, 2 minutes for me to read most of them out. Then I can engage with one or two people, 3-4 minutes. So now everybody's done something. A few people have been heard audibly, which is really all we would want in a live room anyway. But everyone who wants to join in can. But for trainings that I run, and I would heartily suggest this to any leaders running virtual meetings, is never force any moment of participation, such as let's all put something in the chat box and we're all going to sit here and stare at everybody until every single person has written something in the chat box. Number one, some people just might not have anything to say. Number two, they're terrified that what they write sounds stupid. And number three, we could just be there for an incredibly long time. But as a trainer, I actually only need, group of 20, I only need 1 or 2 to put something in. If I get 4 or 5 or 8, that's fantastic. 20 is amazing, but actually then I've got to start saying, sorry, folks, I'm just going to run through these last few. I can't even really engage with them much. So it's creating these little moments. Chat box, green check, red cross in Zoom, thumbs up tools, hands up, anything where people just have an option to do something. And let's be honest, David, in a real world, people's brains drift off a little every so often. And then they suddenly hear, put your hand up if, and they're like, oh, I don't really know what he just said. But they're not in trouble if they don't do it. They'll get back into the conversation. But again, as long as I've got a few people who are with me at any one moment, there's always interaction. Then we can get them to do something solo, to your question. But in general, even if they're doing something solo, 1 to 2 minutes, then we want to use the breakout function, get them off into rooms, talking to each other. You take the facilitator, leader, or trainer, whoever's running it, you take them out of the equation. It just creates a different energy. Now we're a group, we're chatting to each other, small group, 3-4 people, ideas flow a lot better. Then when we come back to the room, there'll just be more to discuss. If I just ask for questions in the room, I haven't really thought about this yet. Once they've had a discussion, now there'll be some questions, challenges, ideas that come out of it.
Yeah, I remember probably 40 years ago, I did Dale Carnegie. And it was every Monday night for 13 weeks, 3-hour class. And the beginning of the class, we had 50 people in the class. Beginning of the class was everybody had to do a 2-minute presentation. And then there was teaching, and then it was, okay, the teaching, you understand the teaching enough, okay, go and prepare and come back next week with another 2-minute presentation. And it really helped, learn things and develop them. Before I dive into, I want to talk about with the training, really where the rubber meets the road. How do you get people to apply it outside of the class, after class? But before we go there, I want to ask you. I know you're a screenwriter, at least part of the time, right? And
Was, yeah.
you've done something with BBC and MTV. I don't know
Yep.
what those were. Are the titles of those something that would be interesting to hear? I mean, with
I would love you to know them. Unfortunately, my screenwriting career was, let's say, it never took off in the way I would like. And looking back now, I'm old enough and wise enough to realize I just didn't work hard enough. And honestly, between you and I didn't want it enough. It's one of those careers where you can't just kind of want to be a screenwriter. If you want to hit it, this has got to be your life, every minute of every day. And I loved it, but I didn't care about it enough. And so the book I wrote, which is called Screenwriter's Journey, is all about avoiding the mistakes that, frankly, I and many, many other people fell into, because it's just not a career that's going to be handed to you. Pick one of those jobs where millions of people want to do it. It doesn't come to you. You've got to go and get it. And I just wasn't fighting hard enough for it. So yeah, I sold some scripts. Nothing made it to production with me as a writer, which is where more money will come. But honestly, even if I had got anything, I realize now I never would have made it in the real world of Hollywood, the real world of fighting against 1,000 other incredibly talented people. How do you get yourself to the fore? That just wasn't my specialty, unfortunately.
And the only reason there's a smile on my face, I appreciate your candor. And I want to go back to that in a moment. Okay. Not so much about screenwriting, but about this concept of what you choose, where you want to be in 10, 20, 30
Yeah.
years. But let me go back to this. The question I was alluding to previously is so, but the screenwriting, at least organizing your thoughts, probably helps you in how you organize your trainings, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And storytelling, of course. Storytelling is a
Yeah.
big part of how people learn and how we get them to act on it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's stay there for a moment. The storytelling piece. And you have a comment that was turning storytelling into a leadership superpower. I
Yep.
see all kinds of things on storytelling. So I haven't seen the superpower though. So what are like the top 3 attributes of storytelling as a leadership superpower?
So let's look at what storytelling does. Why has stories been a part of human development for tens of thousands of years? So whether it was cave paintings, whether it was stories around a campfire, novels, into movies, and now just the sheer breadth of material being thrown at you in a modern world. I mean, my children are 12 and 11, and just what they have to watch, what they understand as story, the breadth of it is just incomparable to what I even grew up with. So stories have always been there. Now, we enjoy them. That's why they're so wonderful. We enjoy them, but actually they're doing many, many wonderful things. So we remember things more in story form. We relate to them much more on a human level and much better. We understand human choices more when they're put in a story. So actually all of these things are going on, but we're quite entertained. We have a nice time. So my kids have been through the years of the Pixar and Disney movies and all the sort of kids movies. And what Disney does better than anybody else is, Frozen is an incredibly just enjoyable movie with a talking snowman in it. But actually what it's about, of course, is being different and dealing with difference and being yourself. These are the big lessons that kids learn from Frozen, but they don't come out at 6 years old knowing that at all. It's just implicitly placed in your brain now. From then on, that's what wonderful movies do. I'm very much a movie person, but stories in all forms. Anytime we bring information to life. So I do a lot of sales training now, of course, coming from sales. But for leaders, anybody speaking to a group, presenting to a person, essentially trying to influence somebody, a story will be a huge tool in making that happen. Just think, how many slides are you going to remember? Not many. How much of the information are you going to come out of a meeting with citing to the next person you meet? Not much. But if they tell you a genuinely good story, you will be able to tell that on. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not as well as the first person did it, but they will have their own version of that story. Just like we can walk out of any movie and basically explain what happened, but also what we're explaining is what I took from this story. Here's the things that happened, but here's what I learned. So when a client, trying to get a client to influence another client, trying to get team members on board of an idea that they might not want to do, all of this is going to be better if we're able to place it in story and make it human, and for bosses sometimes, to be very honest, to speak authentically about where they're at. But one of the phrases I use a lot, David, is realistic optimism. So as a boss, when something's happening, and let's face it, we know people aren't going to like it. If we come into a room and go, hey, everybody, our targets have been raised 500%, or we're losing 10 people from the team, isn't that amazing? Would just sound like an idiotic boss who's utterly disconnected from the real world. But if we also come in and go, oh my God, our targets are being raised 500%, well, that's it. We're screwed. We're never going to make this money. We're immediately just making failure happen. The team will go with that completely. What realistic optimism says is, I can see the challenges here. Like, I'm not blind to what's going on. I understand real life. I don't want our targets raised, but that's happening. So I've gone looking for opportunities here. That's my role as your leader. I've tried to look for some positives in what is obviously a very challenging situation. And I've thought of something from my life when this happened before. I'd like to tell you about it. And now if I put that in story form, it's showing that I'm still a real human. I've had this challenge before and it didn't all go perfectly, but now I'm a human dealing with a challenge along with them, rather than a senior person just saying, here's this horrible thing, get on and do it. So stories in any form, David, I would argue honestly are genuinely valuable. But when they can be stories of, here's something that went wrong, here's a challenge I had, here's when I didn't get it right all the time, those are not only useful just in what we remember, but they are humanizing and create trust of, great, Hywel's a real person too. He sees my problem. We maybe can do this better this time.
Interesting, because the realistic optimism sounds somewhat consistent with your cynicism approach.
Yeah, I mean, alongside it, the other phrase is empathetic cynicism, which is that idea of I'm not coming in to be a cynic, but I'm coming in to understand your cynicism. So it would be stupid of me to come in and say, isn't this terrible? Our workplace is in trouble. But it would also be idiotic of me to come in and say, our workplace is changing. Everybody should think this is great. The moment we think that of people below us or around us, we are setting ourselves up for failure as a leader, but we're just setting them up to be thought of as the negative Nancy. And all they're doing is actually humanly saying, I'm a bit worried here. I'm worried about the future. Things are changing. I don't know how that's going to happen. But the moment we're scared to voice that, A, the change will go badly. B, that person will probably leave. But allowing people to voice their cynicism, here's why I'm worried. I see a problem here. Those people can actually be not only the reason for success of a change, but the best employees you've got, the ones willing to voice their challenges.
Yeah, and I would suggest, I'm curious on your feedback on it. You may have run across this with certain leaders. They don't do that well. So when they try to be real or they try to be, transparent, they don't do it well and they're still holding back and it comes across as fake. And so what's the insurance policy on that? Do you need to have, instead of having your yes men, do you need to have, at least one, if not two or three people who'll shoot straight with you? And that if you're wrong, they're going to say it in a nice way, but they're going to say, hey, this is not good. You need to make some changes.
Look, if you're really lucky, David, honestly, having one person on your team willing to honestly tell you the truth as a leader is fantastic. What I speak about a lot is the luckiest leaders are the people who've just been promoted. So somebody who was their peer is now on their team. That's one of the trickiest relationships to garner. I'm in charge of you now, but they're the last people that will ever honestly tell you the truth. because they're the last people who still consider you a peer who just happens to now be more senior. But I'm still going to speak to you like the dude we used to just hang out at lunch and go and be idiotic. Like, I'll still give you my feelings on that. The moment they leave, that's it. Everybody else you will hire, they will always see you as a leader. They will never tell you 100% truth, but we can encourage it. We can ask for feedback and disagreement a lot more. And the best advice I can give anyone is, when someone junior to you disagrees with you, the first words you say are, "Thank you very much for disagreeing with me." Now, after that, you can say whatever you want. You can say, "I still disagree and I'm in charge, so I'm not doing it." You can say, "I'll go away and think about that." You can say, "That's the greatest idea I've ever heard. I'll do that instead." But what they need to know is that they're not in trouble for disagreeing, and that you will take it seriously and genuinely listen. And after that, fine, you're in charge. Nobody expects their boss to always take their idea on, but we learn very quickly as workers in small and large companies that when we say something, when the boss gives us a half glance or shuts us down or clearly is annoyed that we disagree with them, we just stop doing it. And that's it. The moment you shut them down once, they will never disagree again, and you will never actually know what people think.
Or I would suggest that you say, "Thank you for your candor. Now tell me more." You know?
If you honestly like the idea, great. Yes.
Well, no, even if you don't like the idea, because I mean, you may not be aware enough to like the idea when you should. Or if you don't like it, you need to understand the other side, because you got to come up with a solution for it. Maybe not on the spot, but since that person opened up, now if they're attacking someone in the room, that's different. You know, that's not where you do that.
That's not useful disagreement. That's just rudeness. And, you know, I've done a lot of work in recent years around what we would call diversity, equity, and inclusion. And obviously, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what it is. It's not just being nice to everybody, and it's not letting people say whatever they want to say. There's respect in the workplace, and we should do that at all times. But anyone disagreeing respectfully, even passionately, not rudely, but somebody passionately saying, "I really don't like this idea," to your point, thank you for disagreeing. It take 2 minutes, explain to me why you disagree. But I still have the right to say, "Okay, thanks. I'm still going to do it anyway, but I will give you every opportunity to voice that." And again, when they're not given that space, everyone leaves the room just going, "Oh my God, why did they so loudly disagree? That was awkward for everybody." So again, nobody else disagrees, and that person will eventually stop doing it. So I had a lovely guy who worked for me once. We were colleagues. We both went for the job as manager. I got it. He was not happy at all. And he was already thought of as quite a negative person. And he would disagree with everything, you know, just on principle. But when I took over, this got amplified because he was unhappy that I'd taken the job. So for the first few months, I found this very difficult indeed. But eventually, actually, I realized he did do what he was asked to do. And he honestly did enjoy working there, and he was good at his job. He just was going to disagree with everything on principle, no matter what. So I actually grew to love it. I'd say, you know, "Here's all the ideas. Stephen, what's wrong with them?" And Stephen would go, "Well, this is wrong and that's wrong." And you'd go, "That's great. I've got this inbuilt cynic who will just always tell me what I haven't thought of, what I might not be seeing, but definitely with no hesitation, tell me when he disagreed." And I realized at the moment Stephen left, that was it. That was the last person. And I fell into what all leaders do, starting to think I'm right all the time because no one's telling me I'm wrong, so I must be right. And very quickly, I became quite patronizing to people who did challenge me rather than creating the space I used to do.
So you went on that journey of being patronizing to people who were kind of kissing up or whatever you want to say, or just being quiet. What was the light bulb moment where you woke up and you're like, "Whoa, wait a minute. What happened? What happened to me?" Besides, I lost Stephen, you know?
Well, no, and again, this is on the point question, David. Honestly, I have a story for this, exactly what happened. So I was 25 when I took over my first team. And I think I was genuinely good looking back. I made some good choices as a leader. I'm not saying I hit it all the time, but I was very open to people's views. If somebody came with a challenge, I would say, what do you think we should do about it? Like that was my natural response. My boss at the time said, oh, well done, Hywel, you've opened my eyes. I just give them the answer too much. So I thought I was hitting it out the park as a leader. I'll be wonderful. Then my boss left. She went on. I took that job now with a larger team. But yeah, I started to just, I know what's right. Just do it. Just get on with what I'm telling you to do. And then this young woman came to work for us, and she was wonderful, great salesperson, just liked by the team. Clients adored her. And we had a great first few months. And then I could tell she just stopped enjoying it. She was quite terse around me, wasn't working perfectly. But a new manager job came up, and I went to her and I said, look, Jessica, I think you'd be really good in a manager role. And she said, no, I don't want it. And I said, well, is it the job or is it me? Because I think you have an issue working for me. And she said, no, I'm absolutely fine. And I was like, look, Jessica, we've got to be honest here. What's going on? It seems like there's a problem. She said, you really want to know? I said, yeah, I do. She said, all right, Hywel, you're patronizing, you're micromanaging, you're rude, you don't listen to people, you belittle people. When she just went off on this 10-minute tirade of everything that was wrong with me. And I'll give myself credit. I sat there and I listened. I didn't interrupt her. I let her get to the end of it. I don't remember exactly what I'd said. I'd love to think I said, thank you for giving me the feedback. I don't think I said that. And I disagreed with some of it, obviously. But even as she was saying it, I realized that a lot of these things were true. So I said some version of, thank you very much. Let me go away and think about it. We came back and I said, look, I've taken on board everything you've said. I'd still really like you to take the job. I think you'd be great. She did. We had a wonderful time working together, but that was the trigger. I didn't do it on my own. It took somebody really bluntly and what most people would consider violently, rudely telling you that you're a terrible, terrible person and an awful manager. And I accepted it. And she sent me on a completely different path. In the 3 years that I was still a leader within the newspaper, I was very different, thanks to Jessica. But definitely as a trainer and teaching other leaders, I believe I was now coming from a very different path, which is the best of us can end up going down a bad road. However good we think we are, there is no perfect way. We've got to keep adjusting as we go.
So when she finally blew her cork on you, was her body language, was her tone of voice, was she still respectful, or was she being what some people might say were mean or too forceful? Were you, when you went into flight or fight mode, you were defensive naturally and you had to corral it? So because I'm going back to what you said earlier, that when you're in a training and you think someone's not engaged, that person might be engaged, particularly if you're doing the interactions regularly and you're finding out, are they doing anything? But where one of the things, hard lessons I've had to learn is that, when I've got particularly a child, I've got 5 adopted kids, that, when they're blowing a cork, to use that same phrase, and they may be yelling, cussing, they may be, or just rude, that I have to not get triggered and just stay calm to and ask some questions to make certain they feel heard. So I've gone way down the trail here, but I'm really curious what your experience has been and what you've learned through all this.
Well, I'd say it kind of links everything we're talking about together. And I will throw parenting here with yourself. I was older when I had kids, not old by any stretch in a modern world, but 36 when our first one came along. And I really think I was better at it because I was a bit more experienced as a person, a bit more aware of myself, and honestly had been managing people for 10 years. And I had learned a lot of the things I needed to do, like how do I stay calm in a moment where I would like to just scream at somebody? I can't do that in a corporate setting, but I can do it at home. Who's going to shout at me other than my wife? The kid's too little, so I could have done that, but I was much better at it. But this is not to say in any way that I didn't blow my top at work. I absolutely did. But the core piece of science to this, I'm sure you've come across it in some part, David, is Ego States by Eric Berne, who argues that we're in one of 5 emotional states at any one moment. So sitting in the middle is the adult, which is supposed to be thoughtful, logical, not emotionless, but controlled emotion, equal. But then around that, there's parental state. So you can be the controlling parent, which is telling people what to do, taking charge of the moment. Each one of these can be positive and negative. Nurturing parent, sorry, brain went for a second. Nurturing parent, which is looking after people, so giving people physical and emotional hugs, caring for them, keeping them safe. And then on the child state, adapted child, who follows the rules, does what society tells you to do, does what's expected in a situation. So we shake hands with people we don't know because that's what society says we're supposed to do. And then the natural child who breaks the rules. So if you've got 5 children, are they all grown up now, David, or how old's the youngest
Actually,
one?
I've got 8, but 5 were adopted. So
right.
They're getting there. The youngest is almost 16.
Okay. All right. So those are your natural child years. So why is teenagerdom the most difficult for parents? This is when your body naturally in your mind wants to go and find its own path. So you rebel against the world. You rebel against the rules you've been given to varying degrees, but none of these ever go away. But his argument is, and why I know this so well is we teach it to trainers, but again, for leaders, similar thing. We're adult most of the time at work. So interacting with our colleagues, interacting with clients, dealing with our team. We're an adult most of the time. We're 2 humans having a chat. But at times we will be triggered to one of the states. So the classic is our child comes to us and says, I want a tattoo. We're going to get emotionally triggered to controlling parent, where we say, no, you can't, not in a million years, go back to your room and stay there and never come out. They will then get triggered to natural child. How dare you tell me what to do? I'm a grown up. I can do whatever I want. And now you have a fight. 2 triggered people will end up screaming at each other. The theory is if one of you can stay in the adult, you've got a good chance of stopping this from turning into an outright emotional shouting match. But therefore, the pressure is on one of you to be the adult and to keep calm, even though you are triggered. How do I stay in a calm mode here? So in training, the argument is somebody's being belligerent or difficult or asking what you perceive as idiotic questions. How long do I stay in the adult and try and speak to this person like another human being? At least they're asking questions. They may be irritating, but at least they're joining in. Let's try and chat to them until the point at which actually this is simply more detrimental to the group than it's worth winning over that person. Yeah. At which point you need to choose to go to controlling parent and say, I don't think this conversation's going anywhere. Come to me at the end. I'll chat to you for as long as you want. But we're moving on now. Other people want to learn other things. But still, I'm not being triggered there. I'm not saying, get out of the room. How dare you interrupt my session? I'm trying to choose my moment and how I react. And same thing with leaders. So again, I didn't do this consciously at the time, David, but back to your question. She wasn't rude when she gave me this feedback. I think she was being, in fact, incredibly respectful and telling me the truth. But her tone was definitely unhappy. It was definitely surly. It was definitely angry that she felt this way. I stayed calm, and I think I did a good job staying in the adult. And in fact, I could argue that if I was being triggered anywhere, I was being triggered to adapted child, which is right now, I'll just sit here and shut up. That's not what I want to do, but I will do because I think that's what a good boss would do. They should listen to this. So I will do that half deliberately and half just, I don't know how I'm supposed to react to this. So I'll just sit here quietly. But when I came back the next day, I had, as a good sleep will allow you to do, put all this information in the right place and came back. And as 2 adults, we had a very mature, very open, very thank you so much for what you've said. I take on board a huge amount of it. I disagree with this bit, and I think you perceive that differently than what I thought I was doing, but enough that she took the job as a manager on my team. And as I say, we ended up having an incredibly wonderful year together. her perception of me at the end was wildly different to her perception at that moment. So I wasn't doing it consciously at the time, but now in a training room, and what I'd ask leaders to do and any trainers to do is it should be conscious. You should literally be thinking, I'm furious. I'm absolutely furious. How do I stay in the adult right now, but use that anger to move forward, but without letting the anger out? So the best way I can describe it, David, is we need to describe the emotions without being the emotion. So in a training room, like it's kind of upsetting me that you seem to hate this training so much. I'm sorry you don't like it. I want you to like it. That's very different from, how dare you keep asking these idiotic questions? The second one is just being an emotion. But the first one is being honest. This isn't helping me. If you're trying to not helping me, congratulations, you're succeeding. But actually, I don't think you woke up this morning and thought, I'll try and stiff Hywel's training today. So you need something else. Let me try and understand what it is you need. But I'm talking about my emotion. I'm trying to bring it to the fore and be real without letting the emotion take over.
Well, I think that's very good points. And I think that also you're realizing that if the person feels this strongly, there's most likely a piece of truth there. And if I can peel back the onion a little bit, maybe I can grow, and I'll just, I'll stay calm. I'll listen, maybe ask some questions and go. All right, let me shoot back to something that I almost went to a moment ago. But this thing of, so you do a training and people are engaged. People enjoy the training. What is the system for follow-up to evaluate how well people apply what they learned?
Well, so let me give you some numbers here. What percentage do you think, David, when leaving a training room on their own, will go out, make a change, stick to that change, and make this the kind of new way they do things? Even if it's only one part of the training, what percentage will do that entirely on their own, do you think?
What's that, like 10%?
It's not quite that depressing, but it's not far off, unfortunately. It's about 15% on their own will make a change. Now, what's the prevailing feeling coming out of any kind of training, or even, call it in the more formal sense, but just time with your boss, going over a topic, whatever it may be? Most people will leave the room going, that was interesting, or there was something good in there. I, at minimum, just had a nice time chatting with my colleagues. That's great. But then we just go back to our desk, or we get back to work, whatever it is, and we just forget about it. So that's about 70% of people. 15% of people won't make any change at all, don't intend to, and are just completely ignore it. But most of us come out with the intention of doing something with this. So what's the challenge with training? Especially if you're doing a full day or a 2-day training, or, you're every week for a year training, like that's just so much going on that one of the reasons we talked right at the beginning about why don't people change? So status quo bias, there's various things keeping us stuck, but basically our life is easier if we don't change. We use up less energy. We get on with our life much easier. So let me just try and create patterns and keep it the same. And one of the big challenges is selection difficulty. So if you've been shopping online, you'll go looking for something, but hundreds of choices turn up. Your brain just goes, well, it's too much. I don't know which one I want here. And you scroll for a few seconds and they just go, forget it. Like in the old days, we just walked into a store, there was 5 options. We were actually much more likely to buy something. So when we do a training, you're coming out going, there's a lot of good ideas there, but there's so much. What am I supposed to do exactly? What is it they're asking me to do? So one of the things is I do believe in quite pointed directional trainings. So where possible, a 2-hour training on one topic will be more likely to get somebody to actually change and do the big thing you're asking them than a whole day that probably has 4 to 7 big ideas in that day. Even if they agreed with every single one of them, you can't implement all of those ideas the next day. And if you tried, it would just be too overwhelming and look weird. So instead, grab one topic, concentrate on it. Next meeting you have or the next interaction you have, do this thing. They're much more likely to do that.
So everybody leaves. So basically, as a scriptwriter, as a professional trainer, you're designing it to go from point A to point B. And when they're at point B at the end of the training, they have a clear, here's my target, here's where I want to get, and here are the steps or the process or the schedule or whatever that I'm going to get there. Is that right?
Yeah, as much as possible. Again, I mean, a lot of things we do take story structures. What story structure? We have a hero, something happens to them that knocks their life out of whack. They have some obstacles, they overcome those obstacles. Their life is generally better at the end, or at least different at the end. So, yeah, a training session is not that different. Coming in, a big thing again for the cynics, remember, David, a big challenge that or problem that trainers create for themselves is making it feel like you can't do this thing. I'm here to teach you how to do it. Again, most people will rebel against that a little bit. I can do this thing. I've been doing it. How dare you tell me I can't do it? So the tone of the beginning has got to be not you can't do this, but you're doing this, great. But there's more. There's always something more. There's a way you can adjust it, make it better. So my company is called Alicorn Learning because my partner and I, an alicorn, if you didn't know, is a flying unicorn. So the idea is you're already unicorns. Nobody's saying you're not magical creatures, but you can add wings on. There's something more you can do. So wherever you start, let's knock your life out of whack a little bit by saying, here's something you didn't know about this topic, or here's something new that's come in the last few years, or here's a different way of looking at it. Now let's have a go at that in some form, doing a role play, having a discussion, doing an exercise, where you're not supposed to be perfect at it, because if you are perfect, you can't possibly be learning. But yes, as we leave here today, overcoming your challenge, what's the person you're gonna be? I'll give you a quick story. Once I did a training with a bank on relating to our team members, and all we were saying was, the more you can relate to your team, the better relationship you'll have and the more work they'll do. But it was a bank. There's a certain culture to banks, and it isn't being nice to your team members particularly. That wasn't a part of the culture they'd been raised with. And this gentleman said, look, Hywel, if I come in tomorrow and start asking people how they are, that I'll freak them all out. Like, I've never asked them that at all. And it was like, okay, well, you don't have to do it to scare them, but just tell them why you're doing it. You've done a training. You would like to understand them a little bit more as people. You'd like to know what they do of an evening. Just knowing that about your team members bonds you together in a little bit more way. So don't do anything that's uncomfortable or isn't going to work, but choose something that you can make real. How do you do it tomorrow or the next opportunity, not 6 months from now, where it will definitely have slipped out of your mind completely?
Perfect. I love it. I love it. So you've got so much energy, Howell. I mean, we're an hour in. I feel like I could go all day for the full 8. But this might be a good place to wrap. So you brought up your company. Talk about your company, what you're doing, and where people can learn more, because I love what you're saying. And I think training is such an area where people can improve. You talked about being in a job for 18 months and then getting your first training instead of getting a solid onboarding training at the beginning. So talk about your company and where people can learn about you.
Thank you. Yeah. So as I say, Alicorn Learning, so alicornlearning.com. But yeah, and especially leaders to that point, David, what's the challenge with leaders? Most of us became leaders because we were good at what we did. So we got promoted up to leadership. Very few people get to a leadership position because they showed themselves to be good leaders. You're generally just an expert and the best person around. Let's move you up. But you're learning an entirely different job when you become a leader. And also, I just think it's something you're never done as a leader. I don't care how long you can do it. It's just such a complicated thing, the 1,000 hats you're wearing. So as a company, yeah, we love to work with organizations of all sorts on a specific challenge. You know, we've just merged with this company, or these leaders have come in, or this team has an issue. Of course, we'll work with you. But the other area we do is, as we've been talking about, is work with internal trainers or leaders to help them run their own training sessions better. Because again, that's certainly a thing that most leaders don't even get a chance to ever study, practice, or get good at. You're supposed to do it as a leader. It's one of the hats you wear, but at no point is anybody really teaching you how to do it. So people bring their best self to it, but there are some easy tricks that can take the 2 hours you've got for a learning opportunity from necessary, required, I'll just listen and leave, to actually creating quite an engaging, engrossing 2 hours live or virtually. So any way we can help leaders improve themselves, but improve their teams, you know, why I love this, and I'm sure you do as well, David, is honestly leaving a room thinking people will be better at this. You know, I haven't changed their world completely. Like I haven't, you know, fixed everything, but this topic, they'll be better. And that means all the people who work for them will be better. Working for a wonderful leader is one of the greatest things. I was lucky at the newspaper. I had wonderful bosses for years. And that feeling of this person genuinely cares about me and is honestly trying to help me is just a great feeling, and being part of that. So yes, please do come and find me. I'm the only Hywel Berry in the entire world. So I'm nice and easy to find online at any point.
Well, I really appreciate you being on. And for those of us in the audience who are just listening, Hywel Berry is Hywel for Hywel, Berry Berry. And check out your website, alicornlearning.com. And I just thank you for being on the show. This has been great. I don't know that we've had someone come on and really talk about training, and this is super for everyone.
Well, thank you very much indeed, David. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.